Hello and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi Chris.
Hi Peter.
Phalaenopsis or moth orchids are the top-selling houseplant in the UK. We simply can't get enough of them. However, there is a suggestion in the houseplant universe that the foliage houseplant market may be beginning to plateau and other flowering houseplants are set to become popular and set a resurgence in the marketplace. Today on Dig It, we thought it best to go to an orchid grower and breeder to get his unique take on the world of houseplants of the flowering kind. A warm welcome, Peter, who is no stranger to Buckingham Garden Centre. Where do we find you today?
Where you find me today, I'm at home in Middleton Cheney,
where
I live.
Excellent. Just literally down the road from the garden centre.
I am, that's right. I'm about 20 minutes drive from where you are, actually.
That's great. So we know, Peter, you're a really busy man. Obviously, with orchids taking up your time, you're incredibly passionate about them. So where and when did this passion for growing orchids come from?
Oh, this is going back years, actually, from when I was a young boy. My interest became quite clear what I wanted to do. My uncle's father was a head gardener at Hainault Gardens, not far from where I live, actually, in Hainault. And he was the head grower there. His name was Ted Humphries, and he was famous for growing apricots, actually, but they had a big orchid collection there. And I used to go over there when I was a young lad to see him. And it always reminded me because he had a fantastic Cattleya Portia growing in this greenhouse, which he was preparing for Chelsea Flower Show. And it had 360 flowers on or more. And they had to remove the back of this greenhouse to put it in the back of the van to take it to Chelsea. But this was all in a book that you wrote called Garden Glory. But the village, Hainault, is well known for being called the apricot village. But the orchid, that's where my passion came from to start with.
Okay, and did this sort of fascination for orchids sort of steer your career?
Yeah, basically, how I started growing them after that was it was a little bit longer. When I left school and all sorts of things, I got myself a job, but somebody gave me a Cymbidium orchid just as a gift one day, and I only had a small 8x6 greenhouse in my garden. And I put it in there, didn't know what to do with this thing, but it did flower, believe it or not. And it was fantastic. And what I'd done is I wanted to learn a little bit more about this type of orchid. So I decided to do a bit of looking around, and there was no internet in them days. So I managed to find my local orchid society, which the nearest to me was Solihull in Birmingham. And I made some inquiries, and I went along to the meeting one day, and I couldn't just join like you can today. You had to be vetted into the society.
Wow.
And then they would let you know whether you could join or not. So I had a letter back from them saying, yes, I could become a member. And this was going back over 40 years. And I'm still a member today, believe it or not, with Solihull. So that's where my early days started. From there onwards, really. And I put myself, I wanted to become a judge, to learn a little bit more about judging all these different types of orchids. So we have a thing in the UK called the British Orchid Council. And my Orchid Society in Solihull put me through as a trainee judge through the British Orchid Council, which to qualify took over 4 years, which was amazing, really.
Wow.
But we had lots of seminars to go to, lots of different tables to judge, but it took 4 years to qualify, and it still does today.
And Peter, can I ask, sort of 40 years ago when you first started getting interested by the Cymbidium and things like that, presumably orchids were a lot rarer than they are today.
definitely, yeah. The only thing that you could find in them days, you couldn't find a phalaenopsis, and if you did, it would cost you maybe a week's wages.
Wow.
Yeah, so they were very rare. Cymbidiums were easy to get in them days. You could get them quite easily because they were more hardy.
Yeah.
And they were more available. And don't forget, in them days, we didn't have the overseas nurseries growing them. We only had UK nurseries that grew them. So we used to have one called Ratcliffe Orchids, which was in towards Newbury.
Yep.
And that's where I used to go and buy a few Cymbidiums from time to time, when I could afford it. So they were very rare in them days to pick up that type of orchid. But I carried on and, as I was. And in 2005, as I said, when I qualified to become a judge, I was over the moon. I had my little judge's badge. And then I carried on, with the society, helping them do shows and different things. And then in 2021, a lot farther forward, I was invited to be a member of the RHS Orchid Committee. Okay. And I still am today.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Brilliant. So can I just ask very quickly, what makes a good orchid? If I want to present you my Phalaenopsis or my moth orchid, what are you going to look at with regards to what makes the perfect orchid in a judge's eyes?
I think if you're looking for, like today, if you were judging a Phalaenopsis, for instance, somebody put a Phalaenopsis up before us, the committee, we're looking at things that the structure of the leaf itself, it's not too big, it's nice and compact. The flower stem isn't too tall, it's got enough amount of flowers on it, they're well spaced on the stem, a good size, and basically that's it, and a good bright colour. If you could get a nice bright colour, that'd be good. And the shape, you don't want, it has to be in proportion. The flower wants to be just like a dinner plate, basically, to look at round. Not that size, but to that roundness it wants to be.
I see. And from my understanding, that sort of commercial orchids these days are all propagated through tissue culture. So do the breeders go and look for these prize-winning orchids and then take the cultures from them, or is it just the ones that we see in the commercial market and in the garden centres and supermarkets are not what you class as a proper orchid, or if I could say such, or a prize-winning orchid? I mean, how does it work?
Basically, if you want to, most orchids are done by tissue culture today. They don't do a lot of seed work today. They don't cross one orchid with another. They pick a nice orchid. The big problem is, again, with breeding orchids, if you do it from seed, you don't know what colour you're going to get. If you put a pink with a white, you could get nearly all whites, or you could get nearly all pinks. And they want to know, because the way the orchid market is gone, people tend to like certain colours. Right. So they tend to produce them by tissue culture, and they can get, if they want to breed a white, they can tissue culture a white, so they're all white. If they get a pink, they can do all pink. And that's what it is. The same with the spotted ones. So tissue culture is not an easy process to do. You need a laboratory to do it on, with a thing called laminar flow cabinets and things like that, which is totally sterile and clean, dry an area. And you'll find that Sorry?
I was just going to say, it's not something you or I could do it at home. We couldn't do it on a small scale with like a little Petri dish and some agar jelly or something. Yes. I don't know what you use, but...
No, you don't. Basically, when you're doing tissue culture, you're taking a piece of the tissue off the plant itself. Okay. And then that's been dissected in a laminar flow cabinet. And then these pieces then are put into, like you say, petri dishes, and then they're sown on agar. If you were doing seed, then it's easier to do that. You could do a seed pod, and you could do it from a green pod, and then you don't have to sterilize the seed too much, or you can let the seed pod develop and do the seed that way. That's easier. You could do that at home, basically, with a little bit of care.
So just thinking about that, how do you pollinate an orchid? Just thinking, so I've got 3 or 4 orchids that quite often come into flower at a similar time, but obviously they live in the kitchen, so there's not many bees that fly around my kitchen to come and pollinate them. Is it something that you can do manually with a paintbrush, or how do orchids propagate?
The easiest way to do it is, if you look at the front of the orchid itself, let's take a Phalaenopsis, for instance, it's quite simple. If you look at the lip column, just above the lip itself is a thing called an anther cap. It's like a little white cap.
Yep.
And you can get a toothpick and you can pick that off, and there's 2 pieces of pollen on there. You'll see 2 pieces of yellow pollen, very sticky, and that will then stick to your toothpick if you want to use that.
Yep.
And then what you do, you remove the anther cap and the pollen off the other orchid you want to put it into, and then just put the 2 bits of pollen in there, and 9 times out of 10 you will get a seed pod develop.
Wow.
Normally within a few weeks you'll notice at the back of the flower will die off slightly, and the stem at the back of the flower will start to swell, and that's where your seed pod will develop.
Gosh.
That's brilliant. Okay, so that gives us something to try now, Chris. That sounds really exciting.
My goodness.
Let's start growing some orchids for seed.
Indeed. Peter, you were saying about the tissue process. Is that all done in the UK, or does that happen abroad or further afield?
No, it's all done. The biggest one today is a place called Floriculture. They are in Holland, in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And they've got the biggest laboratories basically in the world for doing that type of process.
Okay, so
they are really geared up to do it, and that's why they do. I mean, if you look at the market today, we're talking maybe millions of Phalaenopsis are produced every year for the pot plant market in Europe. Whether they're in the UK or in Germany or everywhere, and that's why we see lots of Phalaenopsis today in all garden centres. We see them in supermarkets. We see them everywhere.
We do, yeah, and that's why they're becoming incredibly popular, isn't it? I was going to say, would this floriculture company, would they then supply little plants to go to growers around the world, or would it be just for the Dutch market, or would they come over to the UK? Because I know in the UK we grow a lot of Phalaenopsis now.
Yeah, basically today they come in plug trays. Once they've been developed into a tissue, they grow them in plug trays. There's normally about 20 plants in a plug tray, and the Dutch growers then that grow them, they grow these plants on to finish, and they put them then straight into a 12 centimetre pot.
Right.
These little seedlings, and in these growers, the orchid growers themselves, floriculture don't tend to grow them. They only do trials themselves on certain varieties, which I've been involved in for selecting trial plants in the past. But that's what happens. These seedlings then go to the growers. They grow them on, and then they sell them. They normally grow them very warm, about 85 degrees. Right. And then what happens then is they're grown 6 to 8 months at that temperature, day and night, with certain amount of light. And then after that, they get moved to a cooling area, about 10 or 15 degrees cooler, and that will initiate the flower spike.
Gosh, right.
And then after that, as soon as they start to flower, they're packed, sleeved, and gone out. They're going out to anybody who wants to buy them.
Yeah, so they are quite a long-term crop, aren't they, Peter? I mean, to be growing for that amount of time, and then they've obviously...
Yeah, the heat over there is very expensive, and then I know that going back a couple of years ago, they have to buy their gas contracts for growing plants years in advance, and they pay maybe 10 years in advance. They have a contract at a certain figure, gas, and what happened is when the gas prices went up not long ago, a lot of growers had to finish because they couldn't afford these new gas prices. And the cost was so great. And then a lot of people that had been in the business for years decided that they could sell their gas contract because they've got 2 or 3 years left on it and make a lot of money. And so a lot of growers sold their gas contracts and closed down.
Yeah. Gosh.
And that's why Phalaenopsis today is just getting a little bit better now, but it was very slow at one time getting some varieties. And some nurseries have even closed down now.
Gosh.
So the colours that we see coming through on the Phalaenopsis, like recently sort of the yellows, I'm going to say, I've noticed a lot more of. That's purely just to do with what the market is demanding and what you think is potentially going to be the new bestseller, is it?
It is. A lot of the new colours that you see today coming available are bought in from Taiwan.
Okay.
As seedlings. They come in. The growers, and actually I'm going into Taiwan in a week's time because I'm judging at the World Orchid Congress over there. And the Phalaenopsis over there are massive. And they grow them very quick because they have the right climate to do that. Awesome. And then they ship their seedlings over to Europe or anywhere in the world. And that's where all these new colours are coming from now. And then what happens is that they'll buy a batch of 100, these growers in Holland will. They'll flower them and then they'll select ones that they think would be good to grow. So then they would tissue culture those. And that's where all the new colours are still coming now out of Holland.
Okay. And can I just ask, a friend of ours bought us a blue orchid, or a blue flowered orchid, and I think it was dyed with a sort of pigment in the water. It was. Okay. Because the next time it flowered, it came out a nice white colour. And I thought it was a much better thing. Do you know who invented that idea or came up with that idea?
That came from maybe somebody in China or that came up with the ideas to start with. What they do is they get the flower stem and the flowers, whether they're just opening or there's so many open with so many buds, and then they drill a little hole just above a node. There's nodes on the Phalaenopsis flower stem. Just above a node, they injected. It's about 2 inches from the base of the plant. They drill a little 1/8 of an inch hole halfway through the stem, and then they put a little plastic pipette in there full of food dye, a special food dye. And then in the morning when they come back in, believe it or not, all these flowers are blue.
Wow, that quick. Gosh.
And then when that flower stem dies, the new stem comes in, it will be white.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's put the end to a mystery I've had for quite a while, but it's brilliant. So they're not. I wondered if they were growing the plants in like blue water, and it was going through the whole plant. But now you've explained it, that makes perfect sense. It's just a flower that's altered.
Yeah, it's just a flower stem that gets it. The thing is today as well, everything's more advanced than what it was maybe 10 years ago when the blues first came. You can do it. There's some fantastic colours at the moment that they're doing. Again, this all come from Taiwan, and they're all copying this. They can do a two-toned colour on the stem and everything.
Wow.
It's not a thing that I'm in love with, but now the blues, believe it or not, they've found a way now of manipulating the actual structure of the plant to make it blue without dyeing it.
Oh wow, that's
So changing its DNA effectively is it?
You're dead right. This is a thing that it's okay to do that. The public, it's a way forward, and the public would like it. They would like all these new blue colours, and then they will flower blue the following year. Mm-hmm. But as for a judging point of view and registering orchids' names, these have been manipulated. So how can you go down that road in naming an orchid? So it becomes very difficult because we never know where the original plant come from.
Yeah,
right.
Mm.
So, but it is advanced technology, and I'm sure the public would still like to buy that, and I'm sure people would still like to sell it because it's a blue orchid.
Mm. A natural blue orchid, a natural colour, yes. Yeah.
Well, natural.
Natural.
Yeah. Unnatural.
Unnatural,
yeah, that's right.
Brilliant. And I guess things like that sort of do alter the price, because it always interests me that in supermarkets and some places you'll see orchids sort of being thrown out at next to no sort of cost at all, say £10-12. What's the difference between a good orchid and that you're going to pay maybe £20-25 from a garden centre and the cheap one?
Okay, basically orchids are graded when they normally grade A grade, B grade and C grade, and they always have been. Some orchids are better than others, some Phalaenopsis. And what you do is that supermarket orchids are normally bought from Dutch auctions. They have an auction every day in Ellesmere.
Yep.
And supermarkets tend to have a broker that goes into these auctions and they look at the best price that they can get. And I can tell you, like on a Monday morning in Ellesmere auction, there might be 10,000 white Phalaenopsis come through single stem.
Yep.
And certain times of the year, in the summer especially, when nobody wants to buy an orchid so much, is that these plants become very cheap. You can buy them for less than a geranium in the auction, but then they just come over here, put them in supermarkets, and you see them in there, but they're still in the sleeves. They don't take them out the sleeves. They're cheap. When people buy these orchids in supermarkets as well, is that they are a reasonable price. Sometimes you think, well, how can they sell them at that price? But most of them are bought as gifts. Mm. They're then given to their friend who's been ill or something like that. And if that plant dies or the flowers fall off it within a week, they're not going to phone their friend up and say, look, I've just lost your orchid you give me.
Yeah.
And so they know they can get away with lots of things. They have no after-sales service. They don't have any experienced sales staff or no experienced growers that can help you out. Again, that all goes down to price. All they want to do is to clear everything that they've got for their fresh lot that comes through the auction. Now, when you buy them, garden centres work totally different. And I'm sure, your garden centre is exactly the same. You buy from your regular supplier. Mm. He's not a broker. He sources what you want. You may get a list from him and he will tell you exactly what's available on the day or on the week that they want to deliver. He will then, maybe he won't buy these from the auctions. He will go and select all the grade 1 plants from the growers. And then they come into garden centres. But you will pay a premium for that. Yeah. The good thing about this is that you're getting a better plant when they're in a garden centre They're normally taken out the sleeve. Most garden centres take them out the sleeve so that the customer can see the plant itself, not just the flower, but they can see the plant. They've got an after-sales service if something goes wrong. They have experienced people that look after houseplants, so they know how to look after it. They offer the full package. They offer the compost. They offer the fertilizer that you need for them in everything. So they've got that full package, and that's why they can demand a bit better price.
Yes. Now, you just briefly touched on fertilizer there. Am I right? You shouldn't use like baby bio or your regular houseplant foods for orchids?
Well, no. The problem is today with any feed that you buy today, they contain. I won't go into too technical terms with the NPK, but what you need to look at is that when you buy feed, you want to buy a fertilizer that contains no urea. Now, if you look on the bottle, of a bottle of orchid feed, it will contain no urea. If Baby Bio, they would use a thing called urea nitrogen.
Yep.
That's very cheap, and that's all it is. It's just a cheap form of nitrogen, and because orchids grow in bark mixture, the urea nitrogen doesn't soak into the compost very well, and it will burn the leaves. It will burn the foliage, sorry. What's that again? It will burn the roots quicker.
Okay.
That's why orchid feeds that contain no urea are very good. And that's what we always recommend that you use.
And going on from that, Peter, what sort of advice would you give to somebody who's, new to growing orchids? Maybe starting with maybe the moth orchid, the Phalaenopsis, and maybe to your favourite, the Cymbidium. Any tips for getting the best from those plants?
Phalaenopsis are easy, really, to grow. What you've got to realise with Phalaenopsis, you can buy it. It can stay in flower for 6 months. So look how much value you've got already. Right. So what happens is that you take your Cymbidium, Phalaenopsis home, and then you'd put it in a nice warm room, but don't water it when you get it home. Just leave it alone. Let it settle down in the conditions it needs to be in. So if you've got a nice east-facing window, that's always the best for most plants today because they get early morning sun. Don't put it in a south-facing window in the summer, especially between July till the end of August, because you'll burn the foliage and the plant will just disappear. So again, you can put it on a south-facing room, but not in the window itself. Then once it's been in there for a few days, look at the pot. Now, the orchids grow in clear pots today, which is maybe a good thing in one way because the public then can see what the root system looks like through that pot. And if it looks dry, then give it some water. If it looks wet and it's all green inside the pot, then just leave it alone. It could stay another week without water. It won't hurt it. And that's all you need to do. And then every 3 weeks, just give it a drop of feed. So we basically say that you water 1 week and feed the next. Water, feed, all the way through the year. Only if the plant needs it, though. And you can see that by looking through the clear pot to do that.
And with regards to the colour of the roots, do they change colour, don't they, when they're sort of satiated or not or needing water?
Yeah, if you pick an orchid up when you buy it in a garden centre or anywhere really, a garden centre is always good because they're not in sleeves and you can see the whole thing you're buying. If the roots look a silver colour through the pot, then this plant then is dry. But even when you get it home, don't water it straight away. Let it settle down first.
Okay.
But then if it's green that the roots look a green colour and a little damp, you could see that through the pot, then just leave it. There's enough moisture in there to do that. More orchids have lost through overwatering than underwatering.
Isn't that always the way with houseplants? Definitely.
Yeah,
And with regards to watering, is it okay just to? I mean, I'll say the way I water mine, I just I've got a nice pot that I fill up with water, with rainwater, and I dump them in that for 10 minutes, and then pull them out, stick them on the saucer, and let them drain down, and then that's it for the next week or two. Is that the best way, or should you do? Oh, okay. I'm doing something right, Chris.
That's good.
This is a rare thing with plants, isn't it? That's brilliant. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, basically, to water, I find that I like to water from the top. I've always been a believer it only rains one way, and that's from the top. Okay. And in nature, Phalaenopsis are growing on trees. They're epiphytes. But they grow upside down in nature. They don't grow upright. The flowers always grow downwards and not upwards in nature when they hang from a tree. So the water just runs straight off it. Now, if you start watering from the bottom, the roots are going to get too wet sometimes at the bottom, but it's not going to soak to the top of the pot where it needs it as well. So it's easier to water from the top and let it drain through.
Yeah,
and then that's as much as you need. Then the whole of the compost is getting a certain amount of moisture.
Peter,
I know there are people that do leave them in water for 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour, and that's fine. You know, they get away with it, but some people don't. They just find that it's too much for it and the plant can't take it.
Peter, I was looking online actually a couple of days ago, and there's a lady who basically she's an orchid saviour. She goes around and basically finds all these orchids in garden centres, DIY stores which have been discounted, looking very sorry for themselves, and she resurrects them. But what she did say, which I think was really interesting, she gets them home, she gives them a little bit of TLC, cuts the flower spike off because obviously the flowers are finished. And then she doesn't put a cane back in, so the flowers can naturally droop. And on her I think it was on her TikTok or Instagram, she had these pictures of these orchids which she got in clear pots on her wall, and they were just sort of dangling down, and they looked really natural and really different to the way we see them, you know, in our homes on a stake and on a cane. So, is that the way to go? Should we let them be a bit more free, give them a bit more freedom?
Well, not really. I think that the lady who does that, she obviously likes the way they grow. It doesn't make no difference. I mean, most people today like to put a stake in and let the flowers stand upright. You know, they've only got that amount of room to do that, maybe in a window or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are people that do orchids that they grow them and let them grow a little bit more natural. They can do that. But I think the easiest thing for most people is if you're experienced, then it's different. But if you're just at the beginning stages of growing orchids, then, you know, just buy it, leave it in the stake, and then when the new stem comes, just stake it back. You know, I mean, once you've got a little bit more experience in doing things, you can experiment different ways.
Interesting. And is there any way to get the flowers bigger? Because I know when I've been travelling around, and you go to, sometimes I get to go to a fancy hotel, and in their foyers you see these massive Phalaenopsis flowers in flower, but mine never seem to get to half the size with the flowers. Is it just the actual plant that I've got, and I need a better cultivar or a better sort of version of that orchid, or is it the way I'm caring for them?
Sometimes it's nothing to do with care. If you can flower orchids regular, you know, from when you buy them, and they produce a flower stem every year, or you know, resurrect your old stem to make it flower again. But some people go, and you can buy an expensive Phalaenopsis in London, for instance, and they buy from a company called Optiflora, They are the best Phalaenopsis growers in Holland.
Right.
They are. They produce massive whites, and they're called Euclidean.
Yeah, because they've all been white, these big Phalaenopsis I've seen, so that makes sense.
They are. They're like dinner plates.
Yeah, they're lovely.
They are, and they are special. They're not like your normal ones that you see in garden centres, but they may pay about £65 for an orchid like that.
Well, okay.
But they're expensive.
Yeah. So you pay your money, you get what you pay for.
Yeah,
you do. But they still need the same amount of care as the normal ones. They're exactly the same. They can still die. But in their hotels, they've got that type of money that they want to decorate their hotel differently and things like that. Yeah. And some of the upmarket florist shops in London will definitely tend to do that.
I'll have a look out for one of those then and treat myself to a nice big flowered Phalaenopsis. That would be good.
Well, even your supplier, in garden centres can ask for your supplier will get orchids for Optiflora if you need them. If you need orchids, and they do all different colours. They're not just white. Yeah. But they do have what we call high quality orchids. They have 4 stems on sometimes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's it. And they always look far better than mine.
Yeah.
Peter, often things can go wrong with growing orchids, can't they? From your experience, what's the biggest pitfalls people tend to make?
I think the big problem today is that more plants are lost by overwatering than underwatering. Mm-hmm. And people just don't tend, they'll buy an orchid and they'll take it home and they'll water it straight away and they get bud drop. The buds will start to fall off it. Yeah. And what you've got to realise as well is that if you're buying an orchid in the winter, you're buying it in from a nice warm garden centre or a supermarket where it's nice and warm, and they're all grown and kept in super bags as you walk in the door where the heat comes straight down on them. And that sometimes is a kiss of death for most things. But when they take them home, they're putting them in the car, and it could be cold in the winter. So they're only just across the car park, that cold chill could cause a problem. And that's why I say is to get it in the car quick, get the thing at home, keep it in your conditions and let it just stand there to acclimatise for a few days before you even do anything with it. You will get bud drop from these things to start with. And that is the thing. And it's always good sometimes to buy an orchid that's 3/4 open when you buy it. Then at least you're guaranteed that the rest of it could open quite easily. But people want to buy them in bud and then the buds fall off. So it's far better to buy a plant, I always feel, with at least 3/4 of the flowers open.
That's fair enough, yeah.
And with regards to the sort of speed of the flowers opening, this year, for the first time ever, I did something different with my orchids, which was, the base, the first flower on the base of the stem opens first, and then they sort of slowly open up. Quite often, I end up with 1 or 2 buds right on the tip of the stem that don't open, and Manos told me that if you cut the stem at the second node, it'll grow another stem and you'll get a whole nother flush of flowers. But this year I just left it, and the little buds that hadn't opened, after all the other flowers had dropped off, about a month or 2 later, they opened and they flowered. Is that just the natural sort of way things go and the orchid was happy and it was just doing its thing, or are my orchids flowering too slowly, or what?
No, I think the thing is with any Phalaenopsis today is that it's best to let all the flowers open. And Manus was right in what he says in one way, is that I believe that you let all the flowers open, and then when they start to die off one by one, that is the time to cut the stem. But what you need to realise is that you need to leave at least one flower open on the end of the stem when you cut it. If you let them all die, all the sap that's in the flower stem will go into the pot, and you more than likely that stem will not reflower. But if you cut the stem when the sap is still in the pot, and you know that's in because you've got one flower left on the end that's alive, so then you could cut it. I always say 3 nodes. Manners wants to do it 2. If you cut it 3, you'll finish up with a flower stem the same as what you've roughly had before. Just cut it half an inch above the node. You do nothing with it, and I would say there's a 60% chance of the whole thing producing another flower spike from the old stem.
I might be wrong. It may have been the 3rd node he said, but I thought it was the 2nd. But yeah, okay, that's brilliant. So, because the other thing that he mentioned, he said if you do that, obviously it makes the plant work an awful lot harder, and potentially the following year you won't get a flower out of it because it's used all its energy. But does feeding sort of every other water reduce that, or what's the best way to get?
What you've got to realise is the compost that you use today, we use bark compost, good quality bark, and you'll get that from garden centres because they always tend to stock a good quality bark. And then when you repot it, there's no nutrients in orchid bark at all. There's no nutrients in it. You know, you've got to put the nutrients in the pot. And I'm a big believer that you need to feed regular when the plant's in flower and out of flower. And that's why you'll see sometimes orchid fertilizers have a bloom and a grow. So we always say that if you use the bloom feed, that will encourage the flowers to get a little bit bigger than normal. And also that the colour will stay that colour for longer. And that's why they use this different ratio in the bloom feed. And then when the flowers have started to go out of flower, like when you cut the flower stem off at the node, you change your feed over then to a grow feed, because that will encourage the plant to regenerate a new flower spike.
Okay, right. So,
good tips. Thanks for those. I'll see what we can do next year with my orchids then. They are great in the sense that they are so easy to grow, and I can grow them, so it must be easy.
Cymbidiums are slightly different for feeding. Most people who buy cymbidiums, they only flower through the winter anyway, because that's their season. You can buy them normally from September for the smaller ones, and the bigger flowered ones are normally around about this time. And I always say that after Chelsea Flower Show, cymbidiums are finished for the year. So anybody who's got a cymbidium who's grown indoors through the winter, the most important thing now is that in the summertime, in May, or even when the frosts are finished, you can put it outside in your garden in a shady area. But when it's outside, this is where you need to do your work, because you need to produce a new pseudobulb for that pseudobulb to produce another flower spike for the following season. And to do that, it's feeding that makes the difference. And orchid feeds that you see don't tend to do this. This is just a one-off only for cymbidiums. I recommend that anybody that's got a cymbidium, they put it outside from May onwards, and then while it's outside, they still need to water it and they still need to feed it, but use a thing called Chempac number 2.
Okay.
It's a high nitrogen feed. And you could get that is normally a powdered feed. We use it all the time. And then what you do is you feed it every second time you water through the summer. When the temperatures start to drop down in September. Towards the end of September, you bring the plant in then, and then this pseudo bulb needs to be hardened off. And then you just change the tomato feed.
Yep.
And tomato feed will harden the pseudo bulb off and produce a flower spike.
Perfect.
And that's the best way to make a Cymbidium flower.
That's good.
Yeah, Peter, we mentioned right at the beginning of the show that we were going to talk about other sort of flowering houseplants. Obviously, hopefully a lot of them will be gaining in popularity. I know when I started in the 1980s at Rochford's, it was things like African violets and begonias and, pot mums, incredibly, kalanchoes. What sort of flowering plants would you like to see sort of come back into the fore? With orchids firmly in mind, but any other forms which would make you smile?
Yeah, to be quite truthful with you, I'm a big lover of all different types of plants, really. I mean, you can sometimes house plants as well. You want something different that's flower. Kalanchoe, we call them, is a succulent, basically. And that they produce some fantastic flowers today, all different colours, many more than what they ever used to be. And you can also buy a succulent called Echevera, part of the succulent family or part of the cacti group. But you can buy the foliage on them are very fleshy, bit like an aloe vera, really. But they're small and they have some fantastic colours. You can get reds, orange foliage, everything, and it really looks fantastic. And they do flower. They do produce a flower as well. But again, Streptocarpus, we have one of the biggest Streptocarpus nurseries in Europe, and they're in the UK. And they have some fantastic colours. Their breeding regime, they're on top of their game all the time. If I can mention the name, but Dibblers, they are. I'm sure you've heard of them. And to me, I think they are one of the best nurseries for producing. Well, that's all they do is Streptocarpus these days. But the colours that they come out with are unbelievable. They get gold medal after gold medal after gold medal at these big shows. But they are on top of their game, and the flowers are very good. They're easy to propagate. The plants are, when they get bigger, you could take cuttings from them. Again, African violets have gone a little bit out of fashion because they're not available like they used to be.
Indeed, that's one of the things we've found at the garden centre. People ask for them. It's a favourite one, but getting hold of them has been really, really tricky over the last few years.
Yeah, I think the problem is there's only one very small nursery left now on the continent that produce them. And sometimes you see one or two of them, in the auctions or even in the markets over there by the tray, and that's it. But you don't get them like they used to be.
Now that's a plant from memory that definitely doesn't like being overwatered, isn't it?
No, it doesn't. They like to be on the dry side. It's the same with succulents, really. Succulents are okay. They can be. I mean, I've got a few succulents in my kitchen window, just growing away there, and they grow quite well. But again, don't get any water on the foliage, and try and use rainwater. Rainwater's always better. Collect it in a bucket, let it stand there in a jug the night before, so it's at room temperature. Same with growing with orchids, it's exactly the same. Try and use rainwater; it's always a little bit better.
Because someone once told me always sort of warm the water up on the radiator, so it's almost tepid. Is that a good idea or not?
The water from a radiator? Or
No. So I've got my water bucket outside, and I go and get a jug of water, and then from the bucket, and then I stick it on the radiator to warm it up. Not so it gets massively warm, but I'm guessing it's probably 25 degrees or so when I generally use it. Is that a good idea or not?
I suppose it would work. I I've never tried it myself. I just put it in. If the plants I have here, I just bring a little jug full in and let it stand at room temperature overnight, and it's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I think if you used it from a cold water but straight away outside, then it would be a problem.
Yeah, because that's what I was told. Is you shock the roots if you put them into really cold water, which is why I was told sort of always warm the water up a little bit. But like you say, sort of room temperature is probably best. Yeah. That's what the plant's in, isn't it?
And as I say, going back to African violet St. Paulias, when I used to grow them commercially back in the 80s, we used to grow them on sand. They're actually on big sand beds. So they got the humidity from that, and it was obviously not the best material to grow houseplants in quantity on, because sand gets a bit dirty, and you get. But it's obviously capillarity is great, and you get that humidity, and they grow really well.
Yeah, I think really, it's like most house plants today, you use a good compost. But I always tend to buy a basic house plant compost from a garden centre, but then I'll put a bit of vermiculite and a bit of grit with it. And that helps with a little bit of drainage, and I just tend to do that extra. And it's the same with cacti, it's actually the same I always put a little bit of vermiculite and a bit of grit in extra to give it a little bit more drainage.
Okay, Peter, we're coming towards the end of the podcast, but we usually ask our guests a couple of questions towards the end, and it's our shipwrecked on a desert island one. So which tool or plant would you wish for, or you could enjoy life on your virtual island? Any thoughts?
Go on a desert island. I think the only thing that I'd ever need, I could take 2 Phalaenopsis with me, plant them on a tree in a desert island and let them grow naturally, and then we could hybridise them from seed on there. Then couldn't we? It'd be all right. And I think all I'd need then is I've always got a good what I call a good knife in my pocket with lots of different gadgets on it, and I always feel that I've always got that in the greenhouse with me as well. So, you could manage off of that. But again, Phalaenopsis is a big passion of mine. I've been involved in Phalaenopsis for years now. I've grown them. I've got awards from the RHS for some of my hybrids that I've done over the years. And I've even had them now tissue cultured, and they're available. They used to be, years ago. I don't know if they still are now or not commercially, but and that's it.
Wow. Fantastic. Yeah,
that's a good accolade, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess sort of through your life in horticulture and giving all the wonderful talks and doing all the judging that you do, you've possibly come across some amusing tales and stories. Could you share one with us?
I've seen people come in to bring orchids into me, asking me to repot it, or what can I do to revive it. And I think the worst one I had was when a lady had repotted this orchid into a bucket. It was a Phalaenopsis, and she came in with a bucket and a handle on it, and she repotted it in garden soil.
Okay.
And it was... And obviously there was no roots left on it, but the leaves were still in pristine condition. And she said, "Well, why doesn't it flower?" And we took it out this bucket, and there was no roots on it whatsoever, but the leaves were really nice and healthy. And I just couldn't believe how the plant had survived that long. We put it into bark, and I just told her just to leave it. And what we done, because it got no roots to anchor itself to, we put 2 pieces of cane on either side of the plant just to support it a little bit. It did grow a little bit, but it took a long time. But it took so much out the plant that I think eventually it just died anyway.
Oh, bless.
Memorable. That was the worst thing I've ever seen, I think.
Brilliant. So a tip to our audience: don't grow your orchids in a bucket in garden soil.
Yeah,
that's good.
That's right.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for all of your helpful comments and the discussion we've had today, Peter. It's been brilliant.
Fascinating.
No,
Thank
it's
you.
good. It's good to invite me, and I'm pleased that I just hope that what we've discussed, it will help a few people.
I'm sure it will.
And like I said before, you know, you get after sales services from garden centres. You can't get an after sales services in a supermarket. So, just if you want to know a little bit more, you have to buy from garden centres. They have knowledge in there. Look at Chris. I mean, I talk to Chris quite a lot on some garden plants that I have here. He's just a walking encyclopedia. Chris is. He's unbelievable.
Totally agree with that.
Bless you, Peter.
Totally agree with that. He's amazing.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
But the thing in gardening, as we know, we're learning all the time. And today, Peter, you've certainly enthused us to grow even more orchids. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Peter, just finally, to find out a little bit about what you do, is there any websites we can guide our podcast listeners to?
I feel that if people, I don't have a website at all. I have a mail order company, but not on orchid plants. I have a mail order company called Orchid Accessories. Oh. We supply orchid accessories through mail order. Right. I have people phone me up from time to time, want to know a little bit about orchids, but you can get my phone number off the website. Or in email address. People email me all the time, and I don't have a problem. But if they're very keen on growing orchids, the best thing for them to do is to join their local orchid society. And to get that, they go on to a thing called the British Orchid Council. Mm-hmm. You can find it on the internet, and then it will give them a list of all the societies in the UK. Up and down, and also a list of all the shows, orchid shows up and down the country.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, we'll make sure that information goes onto our Dig It show notes, Peter, so that'll guide people to those websites. Yeah. Thank you very much again. Really good to talk to you.
Okay, you take care.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives. From parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.